Hi, my name is John Glanvill and I'm an anxiety specialist, and I'd like to share with you one of the biggest secrets to finding calmness, which is learning about something I call the I-mind ego trap, or IMET for short. And not only do most people not know about it, it's also further hidden from our conscious awareness beneath the unconscious stories that most people tell themselves about themselves, which are the I am stories. I'm not good enough, I'm too old, I'm not clever, funny, confident, I'm too anxious, or whatever your I am story might be. However, if you can take the time to comprehend how the I mind ego trap works, and then sneak under these self-limiting narratives that we incessantly repeat to ourselves, you'll see that this wisdom explains why clever people fall into the traps of indecision, anxiety, self-doubt, exhaustion, and procrastination. So in this video, I'm endeavoring to explain something very complex, the brain, in the simplest way I can, which is through the use of metaphors and analogies, which, though not necessarily true, point in the direction of truth. Because if we're honest, even the most experienced of brain scientists, they admit that they know almost nothing about how the brain works, and it's taken them far too long to teach us how we may think differently to find mental stability without resorting to prescription medications. So if you've ever said to yourself phrases like, I won't change my mind, or I can't make up my mind, or my mind won't stop racing, have you ever considered what is this mind to which you refer? And in one comment like, I can't change my mind, who is the I that couldn't change the mind, and what is the mind that needed to be changed? And I think for most people, their sense of I is in fact their ego, their sense of self, the program story of who the individual thinks he or she is. You look in the mirror and your ego says, you look crap today, or maybe it says, you look great today. Either way, it has an opinion. It seems that the ego is the primary voice inside your head telling you what is good and bad, right and wrong, judging everything and commenting on everything. So this concept that the feeling of I is you or your ego is the first falsehood that I would like you to consider. Because surely you are the aspect of yourself that is watching and listening to all that noisy narrative and all those negative stories. Classically, that part of you watching is called the observer. So it doesn't take a huge leap of cognition to change the language to, from my observer's perspective of I, the noisy and opinionated ego can be watched from a more detached perspective where I don't need to believe its old conditioned stories. I hope this makes some sense. I imagine the ego and the mind to be constructs of my brain rather than my true sense of self, which of course is the observer, which for some may be thought of as their soul, and perhaps for others the sensation of conscious awareness. And if the ego and the mind are of the brain, the brain's intellect rather than intrinsically me, then surely they should be reprogrammable. So what then is the mind? Well, I envisage the mind as being a screen that thoughts are projected onto. To me, the mind doesn't do anything. It's just a screen, a blank space where thoughts, ideas, concepts, words and images can be created, displayed, presented, developed, explored and played around with in silence, meaning the screen is silent, even though the ego and the brain are adding lots of commentaries and stories and ideas about whatever's been played out on the mind screen. In my model, I call it the mind screen, like a chalkboard, a whiteboard or a computer screen. A good analogy might be to liken it to the cinema screen that the movie is projected onto. The screen is not the movie, but without that screen, we can't watch the movie. And I think it's the same with our thoughts. The mind screen is where the thoughts are projected onto, and without it, how would we be able to see them? In the simplest form of my model, the mind screen has two sources of input. Thoughts may arise from the unconscious brain, just suddenly appearing out of nowhere, or from the conscious brain, which knowingly decides to consider a thought, thus it appears on the mind screen, ready for the process of thinking and analysis. You could say you are holding that thought in mind, or more accurately, on mind, on the mind screen. Now, of course, these two sources often interact. Like when you are consciously or deliberately considering a problem, then all of a sudden an answer just appears coming up from your unconscious mind and appears on the mind screen where you can consciously see it. As we know, your body blindly responds to what's on your mind screen. Scary thoughts scare the body, and happy ones make it feel happy. But consider this: having no thoughts, or you might say a clear mind screen, sends the body into its most favored mode, which is the silent rest, digest, and repair mode, where your emotional battery gets its best rapid charge and your biological health becomes restored. So if our mind is just a screen that thoughts are projected on, then who or what is watching, manipulating, and analyzing those thoughts on the mind screen? Which we might call the process of thinking, problem solving, or creativity. Now, as I see it, we have 5 main aspects of ourselves that look at and interact with the mind screen. Firstly, our conscious logical thinking brain. As well as adding thoughts, we'll be looking at the screen to see what the unconscious brain might be adding in any moment. And equally, the unconscious brain will also be looking at the mind screen from time to time, though much less often, as so many of the unconscious brain's decisions just come from automated responses that just seems to fire off before you've even had a chance to consciously intercept them, like suddenly becoming anxious or suddenly becoming angry. And I think this is another trap to be aware of. The anxious thoughts just unconsciously appear on your mind screen, but you consciously try to analyze where they came from and why, but they were just automatic programs from past experiences. Now, the third aspect or watcher of the mind screen is the ego, your protective personality, your inner child, your intellect, which wants you to be safe and do well. It doesn't want you to look stupid. It wants you to fit in, be the best, or however your ego was trained during childhood to see yourself and the world around you. Then fourthly, we subdivide the ego into smaller fragments who watch the mind screen. And these are our personality traits and the characters that we have within ourselves: the introvert, the extrovert, the settler, the nomad, the warrior, the pleaser, the judge, the victim, the princess, the wounded child, the hero, the fixer, the rescuer, and all those varied learned aspects of behavior who each have an individual thought pattern. And often these aspects of the brain have opposing opinions, like the extrovert saying you should put your needs first, whilst the introvert worrying about other people's needs first. And then finally, the last part of you watching the mind screen is your observer. But this is the only one who, for the most part, is silent. He just watches, whereas all the others are noisy, opinionated, and squabbling with each other. So here's what I need you to consider. There is no such thing as the mind. Let me say that again. There is no such thing as the mind. The mind is just a word, a label, a catch-all term that describes all aspects of the brain interfacing with each other, and each has different needs, perspectives, contexts, and contents. And all these many thoughts, ideas, concepts, memories, learnings, and triggers are projected onto the mind screen, but the screen is just a screen, a place where we can see our thoughts, explore them, play around with them, or we can ignore them. You don't have to look at the mind screen. You can place your attention elsewhere. Your observer can place his awareness on something else, like on your toes, or completing a task like washing the dishes. And classically, this is called mindfulness, but I prefer to call it mindlessness, because the mind screen is inanimate. It doesn't make any decisions. It can't find answers or stop you from doing anything. Those behaviors come from all the different aspects of your brain, each with different perspectives, needs, and opinions. You can't ask the cinema screen if it liked the movie because it's just an inanimate screen. So if we're saying, I can't make up my mind, or my mind is racing, or my mind won't let me do that, we are blaming something that is not real for our thoughts, decisions, and behaviors. And this means that we are not owning our problems. We are not taking responsibility for our decisions by blaming the mind, which is only a screen. Let me see if I can give you an example. You might say, I can't make up my mind, which implies that you are blaming the mind for its inability to give you an answer. But can you see that you are not taking responsibility? You are deferring to the mind, which is only a screen upon which all the many parts of you are quarrelling and squabbling, and within themselves unable to find a resolution. And rather than saying, I don't know what to do in this situation because the many opposing facets of my personality are in mental disagreement, we say, my mind won't let me find an answer. We are unknowingly deferring responsibility to something that cannot be responsible. And let me show you how deeply ingrained all of this is. If I said, what I've just proposed might be hard for you to get your mind around, you'd say, yes, it is. But you can't get your mind around it as we don't have a mind. It's a trap. It's a trick. We only have a mind screen that we blame for our inability to make decisions because we haven't yet mastered the brain skill of thinking from one perspective and in one context and on the appropriate content one at a time. Now, for a calm person, usually the mind screen is pretty empty, meaning the conscious part of the brain looks down onto the mind screen and it's mostly blank. Nothing is happening. You might say the many aspects of the brain are quiet as not much is being projected onto the mind screen. And it's very easy to sleep when this happens, and the body is usually very calm. And you might say this is the default state we are looking to be in most of the day, thus allowing us to be continuously recharging our emotional battery. Not wasting that precious emotional energy thinking unnecessary thoughts, which we might call worrying too much. Most worrisome thoughts playing out on the mind screen are virtual reality stories about the future that haven't even happened yet, or long gone stories about the past of which there is nothing you can do about them except let them go and take them off the mind screen. Okay, so let me continue expanding my metaphor. When the brain is operating well, helpful information will be passed up from the unconscious brain and displayed on the mind screen for the conscious mind to observe and then to decide whether to take action or not. Let me give you an example. If a friend said to you, who starred in that film with the big ship and the iceberg? Your unconscious brain would rummage around in the records until it found the answer. It would then project it onto the mind screen where it just appears to your conscious awareness, and subsequently the automated voice just tells your friend what that answer is. Now, if you're able to step back far enough, you'll notice that this is an automated process. The brain just does it. But your ego steps in and claims credit for finding that answer and telling your friend. But your ego was not part of getting that answer, although it took credit for the result. It says, I did that, how cool am I? It's so obvious, but few people see things this way. For the most part, you are not thinking. You are the observer of what is being thought within you by your brain. And it's likely your brain answered that question about who was in the film, gave you an answer, projected something into your mind screen, and perhaps your ego might have even had a little smile. But nobody was asking you to answer that question. It just happened in your brain because that's what the brain does. You have a brain, but the brain is not you. Now, we can laugh at our ego when we catch it doing this, taking credit for something that it hasn't even done. But this egoic propensity has an enormous downside. Because if the ego believes it is he who's really doing it, then if the answer is wrong, or if the information can't be retrieved, then it's also he who is stupid, or he who has a bad memory, when in truth he had nothing to do with the process at all. Even so, that story of being stupid or having a bad memory can escalate into a belief system or an I am story, like I am a person with a bad memory. Now, I know this is complex, but I hope you can at least begin to grasp what I'm pointing to. It took me 15 years to be able to understand this. I was trying to get my mind around it, But it was only when I realized there was no such thing as the mind that I was able to comprehend this new perspective. And until you can see this too, your little ego will be failing left, right, and center because the brain's automated memory retrieval system, it's not very good. How can it be? All those cells, neurons, synapses, thoughts, images, experience, and memories all squished into our grey matter. It's lucky we can even remember our names. So a common error that anxious people fall foul of is they try to force the brain to find answers. They strain to consciously find that information. And they say things like, oh, what was that word? Oh, I know it. It's on the tip of my tongue. Oh, this is so silly. It's so simple. What's wrong with me? But this style of trying to consciously force thinking does not work. It takes processing power away from the unconscious brain and it clutters up the mind screen. So even if the unconscious brain found the answer and posted it to the mind screen, it may be challenging for the conscious brain to quickly identify that information amongst all that chaos on the screen. We've all experienced trying hard to consciously remember something, only for it to appear on the mind screen quite quickly once we stop trying. As I've said in many of my other videos, the unconscious brain is 1,000,000 times faster and 1,000,000 times more powerful than our intellectual conscious brain. And we must learn to trust it, to accept its flaws, to marvel at its creativity, and to consciously get out of its way. So thank you for watching this simplistic explanation of just one aspect of the brain. My full and detailed explanation can be found in video 35 and many other of my videos in my anxiety and OCD recovery course, and I'd love you to check them out. And if you've enjoyed this video, please feel free to share the link on social media, to like this video and leave a comment below. Thanks very much.